All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Cody. I'm a marketing specialist here at QNAP, and I'm here with our product manager, Deval.
Hello, good morning, everybody.
And today we're going to be discussing how you how you can deploy a network switch to upgrade your network. And so we'll be looking at how you supporting high-speed network connections within a LAN network. We'll look at some both 2.5 gigabit and 10 gigabit switches. We'll be going over managed switches versus unmanaged switches. We'll go over our our managed switch operating system or interface, QSS. And then Deval is going to give us a live demo to show us what this looks like up close, and then we'll have a Q&A time. And so, although you can access many devices within a network via Wi-Fi, a solid Ethernet connection will typically be faster and more stable. And this makes connecting devices within your local area network directly using Ethernet cabling a very appealing option for environments requiring high-speed data transfer, low latency, and stability. A router will often support a handful of Ethernet ports. However, if you require support for a large number of devices, you'll you'll need something more to support that. And this is where network switches come in. Network switches can be connected to your router to supply many more Ethernet connections. So the router can still serve as the DHCP server to assign IP addresses to devices connecting via the switch. And connecting to a network switch can reduce latency for workstations accessing the internet and greatly increase the transfer speed of data within your network. A single gigabit Ethernet has long been a standard in networking, especially in home networks for those requiring high-speed data transfer. There are numerous options to upgrade. High-speed transfer is often useful for creatives such as uh, videographers who need high-speed access in order to directly edit off of a storage device. And with resolution becoming increasingly advanced, file sizes grow and require high-speed connections to support the transfer of the increased data being created. So reducing bottlenecks due to slower network speeds can greatly increase productivity, of course, and overall increase the efficiency of your company. So looking at 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, while single gigabit speeds have been common, we're quickly seeing 2.5 gigabit being adopted more and more. And as the name would imply, it has a theoretical max speed of 2.5 times that of a single gigabit Ethernet connection. And while there are indeed many faster Ethernet connections than 2.5 gigabit, there are some advantages to deploying a 2.5 gigabit network. One of those being that a 2.5 gigabit environments will be less expensive. For many users, 2.5 gigabit will be all that they need, and it provides max speeds that are theoretically faster than Wi-Fi 6, which is something that can't be said of the single gigabit connection. And so it can also be a big improvement for those in the creative space who may not require 10 gigabit, but could greatly improve their overall workflow with an upgrade to 2.5 gig. Another major appeal to the 2.5 gigabit connections is that you can use the same Cat5e wiring as a single gigabit connection. You'll only have to upgrade the ports that you're using to connect. So not only does it save you money on buying new Ethernet cables, but if you've gone through great trouble to run the cabling throughout your house or your place of business, switching out all of the cables may be a bit of a hassle. So the 2.5 gigabit gives you a very substantial boost without a huge investment and practically zero effort. For those who do require faster speeds than 2.5 gigabit, QNAP also makes affordable 10 gigabit network switches. This pairs well with a number of 10 gigabit QNAP NAS to facilitate extremely quick data transfers over the network. And this can be helpful when many devices need to access the server, even if each device is only connecting at a single gigabit speed by connecting to the 10 gigabit NAS over the 10 gigabit switch. You can help avoid network congestion when multiple workstations are accessing that same server. And if you're simply connecting via a single gigabit network, all of the connecting devices will need to share that connection, and it's going to greatly diminish the transfer speeds and likely hamper your overall efficiency and productivity. In addition to creating 2.5 gigabit and 10 gigabit switches, QNAP has also come up with some solutions with a combination of both. And so this helps keep costs low while providing a unit that will suit many businesses' needs. These switches they're great for use cases involving a 10 gigabit server with many devices accessing the device. Like I mentioned earlier, the 10 gigabit connection can serve as a 10 gigabit backbone, which can alleviate the bandwidth congestion within the network when many devices are connecting at once. And then each individual device may only support a single gigabit or 2.5 gigabit, but having that 10 gigabit port to your server, you can make the full use of that connection as it is dispersed between many devices. And one great example of this is our QSW M2108R2C model, which is a managed switch with two 10 gigabit combo ports that can support either 10G base T or SFP+, as well as 8 2.5 gigabit RJ45 ports. And QNAP manufactures both managed and unmanaged switches. Unmanaged switches offer an affordable option for those who don't require configuring more advanced features and just need to supply additional high-speed ports to their network. Managed switches enable the administrator to access and manage the switch using an intuitive interface to configure various advanced networking features and help just monitor what's going on the switch. And these things include stuff like port trunking and link aggregation, VLANs, and stuff like that, and more. And so the QNAP switch system, or QSS, is QNAP's interface for these switches, and it provides a web GUI and makes it easy to set up and manage your network. The QSS management software helps you manage the switch system, providing you with viewable port status, where you can easily see which ports are connected, and you can monitor port traffic. You can check packet statistics through the interface. You can also implement flow control to balance speed and help the network to manage traffic smoothly. And within QSS, you can also configure VLANs, like we said, and link aggregation, and many networking features. And so with that, Deval is going to give us a live demo here as I hand off to Deval, and he's going to help us out with that.
All right, thank you very much, Cody. Let me show my screen. All right, so once you install the QNAP switch, a managed switch, you can actually find that QNAP switch using the QFinder application on the QNAP, and then just double click on the application, and you can actually browse through to the QNAP switch once it has the IP address, and then double click on it, and you can log into it. So the interface, the username and password by default is admin, and the MAC address of the port of the QNAP that will be posted on either the QFinder. So the QFinder will have the MAC address. You can use that as your password for the first time, and you can change it once you're logged in. Once you're logged in, you will be greeted with an overview page that shows you the information about the port status. So you can quickly get information about what's going on with your QNAP switch, how many ports are online right now, if there's any ports that are not connected, or they're connected, or just gives you more information about your switch firmware, switch's IP address, port traffic as well. And you can also see the 10 GB port traffic as well. So you can quickly get information about what's going on with your network when you initially log into your switch. Under port management, you can actually go ahead and check more detailed information about the port status, how many ports are connected, or did you disable any of these ports, or and what speeds are they connected as, and the flow control, is it enabled or disabled, and we can check that as well. And then you can also notice in the QSS switch, there's a great feature that many of the switches or many of the managed switches do not have, is the static page that is on the top of the page. So when you go to any settings on the QNAP switch, this static page will always remain, so you can understand what's going on with the switch, or which port you're working on, or what's connected, as well as you can also change what you want to see. You can see the traffic, you can see the lag status, you can see the VLAN status, but you will see the static information on top of the page. So when you're changing settings within the switch, it's very easy to know which port you're trying to work with, right? So if there is any port that is disconnected and you're trying to troubleshoot, or you're trying to set up that particular port, you can actually quickly change or check settings here and then change your settings right here. So if you're setting up a VLAN and you want to see which port you want to set up as VLAN, you can always you will always see this particular page, and then you can add, and then under the current VLAN status, you can also see which VLAN ports are configured as, and you can also understand. So this static page really helps you when you're trying to set up the switch, so that page is always there. Without this page, you always have to go back and forth under port management and then going back to VLAN or whatever settings you're trying to set up to understand what you're trying to change. But with this static page, you will always see what's going on with your switch, no matter where you're located at. All right, so going back to port management, you will see, again, the port status information. Again, you will also see the speeds they are communicating as. So if it's 1 gigabit, if it's 10 megabits per second, 100 megabits per second, you always see here, right here. Also, if it's a 10 gigabit port as well, you also make sure that it's communicating as 10 gigabit as well. So you can get that information from here as well. Under port statistics, you can also check by bytes or by any errors or any packet losses. You will be able to understand what's going on with your switch. You can also go in more details, and you can also see any errors as well within the switch or within the particular port. So this is a great troubleshooting step as well. On a port configuration, you can enable or disable one particular port if you like to. Disabling the port completely disconnects the connection, even if it's connected. You can also they won't be able to communicate to the network, and when you disable the switch. You can also configure your speeds. You can manually configure. You can set up as auto negotiation, where the QNAP switch and the device that's connected to it would automatically negotiate the speeds between each other, or you can manually change the speed down to a slower speed as well. And also for switches that do not have SSP, so SSP they're not allowed to change. They have 10 gigabit per second port only. They do not negotiate down to any other speeds. But if you do have switch that has 10 GB port, then you can actually change the 10 GB port to be either 1 gigabit port or lower as well. But again, setting it to auto negotiation, the QNAP will work with the device to get you the best speeds that device can support. And also flow control is, if you enable flow control, this helps to, what this allows you to do is, if you have a 10 gigabit NAS connected to a 10 gigabit port, but you have a 1 gigabit computer that's communicating to the 10 gigabit port, the flow control will allow the QNAP to the 10 gigabit device to communicate to that slower speed without having any problems or errors. Because remember, you have a high-speed connection that is trying to communicate to a slower speed. So with flow control, it can make sure that the connection is stable between the high-speed and slow-speed connection, and everything is working together. So we recommend enabling flow control as well. So this is the port configuration settings. Under VLAN, you can always tag and untag VLANs. You can create a new VLAN, and you can also create a new VLAN here. You can tag and untag VLAN. Lag is the link aggregation. I'm going to show that into your next page. You can also do a whole lag to be tagged or untagged on a particular VLAN setting as well. So you can do that right here. If you want to tag it or untag it, just check the box and save the settings. and you just created your VLAN. So if you do not understand, so let's say for example, if you do not understand a particular setting, you want to understand how to set up a setting, you don't have to actually open up a manual. The QNAP, the operating system provides a great feature called settings guide. This allows you to click on this particular button and it will actually guide you what you need to do to set up a particular setting. So this is a great feature that QNAP provides. So without having to open up a manual, you can just go to settings guide and just follow step-by-step instructions and you can set up a setting. So if you don't understand any settings, you can just click on settings guide and just help it guide you to set up a particular setting. So that's a great way to do it as well. So that's your VLAN settings. You can also check your information about VLAN status as well right here. Under link aggregation, this is what we call as port trunking. So this do supports 802.380. So if you want to set up multiple ports to work together to give you redundancy as well as performance upgrade, you can do that as well. So for QNAP, if you have a QNAP device, a QNAP NAS, especially, the QNAP NAS also supports 802.380. So if you do, and we call it as port trunking. So you want to set up. So if you set up a lag, you also have to make sure you set up on the end device as well. So if you set up a, so let's say for example, you've been trying to set up a lag of 1, 2, 3, 4. The maximum port you can configure is up to 4 ports, and then you can set up 4 ports, and then you can set up as LSCP or static. We do recommend LSCP, and then hit save. So that gives you that gives you the settings that will save you the settings for that particular lag. And once you have done that, you have to enable port trunking on the QNAP side as well. So you have to go back to the QNAP NAS and go to port trunking and set up those 4 ports. So it gives you higher speed. So if you port trunking, or if you aggregating for 1 gig connection, that can theoretically give you 4 gigabits per second. Or if you're trying to set up multiple 10 gig connections, like this QNAP switch has up to 4, but most QNAP come with either 1 or 2. So if you have a QNAP that supports 2, then you can do, I think I did lagging on my main port. So let me disconnect and reconnect. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So I did set up lagging on the port that is not on my computer that is connected to the switch. So that is the reason it got disconnected. You have to make sure that the computer or the QNAP device do support lagging if they are port trunking. If they're not, then you will see this particular issue where the computer will stop communicating. So you have to use another particular port to go back to the switch and disable lagging or disable link aggregation. So once you have set up the LACP mode on the QNAP switch side, then you have to go on the QNAP NAS or the computer and set up lag as well on there. So on the QNAP NAS, you can go on the network and virtual switch and then set up under interfaces, set up port trunking, and then you can group multiple ports. So for example, as I was saying, if you group 4 1 gig ports, then theoretically that gives you 4 gigabits per second. Or if you set up 2 10 gig ports, that can give you 20 gigabits per second of theoretical speeds. And also what link aggregation allows you to do is, in case of one of the port disconnects or one of the cable goes bad, all your network traffic is routed to the other port. So that's also something called as a backup port as well, or a link. That's the great advantage of having link aggregation as well. So if one of the port goes down or one of the cable stops working, all your traffic is not disconnected, actually goes routed through the other 3 ports or the 1 port or whatever, however link aggregations you have. You can start with 2, 3, or 4 under link aggregation. So that's your link aggregation setup. Under RSTP, again, RSTP allows you to do is it allows you to create something called as a loop prevention. So again, RSTP is used when you have 2 or more network switch connected and you want to prevent a loop. RSTP prevents network loop and as well as provides a backup path in case if the port goes down. By default, this option is turned off. But if a user wants to set up or enable this particular option, you can select the bridge priority. A bridge priority is an option to select a root switch, which would be the main switch. If not sure, and also if you're not sure about the port, leave it default as 32768 particular on that particular port, or default to that number. Okay, And for the port role and the state switch, we will work with each other to select which is the root role, and then also it set its own state as well. The port that are connected to the other switch would be the ones that will have a role and the state, and other ports are connected that are not connected to the other switches or devices like connected to a computer NAS or computers or NASs or anything that is connected to another switch would automatically be disabled. You can either turn these ports off for RSTP or leave them on as it doesn't cause any harm. So again, if you have multiple switches and you want to make sure you have a backup path for these particular switches, you can actually enable RSTP. And if you connect more than one cable to the same switch, it will actually prevent a loop. Because remember, if you do connect multiple ports, multiple switch to one to same switch, it will actually create a loop and it will cause the network to go down. But with RSTP, will actually create a backup path and it will automatically select which is the best path in case of one of the cable or one of the switch goes down. The network will still stay on. And if you have more than one switch, you can actually create a topology with each switch connected to the other. And then if one of the switch goes down, the RSTP will make sure it communicates to the other path as well. So that's another great feature that QNAP supports. So on this particular example, on this particular icon, it has three particular switches. So you can actually set up on this three network topologies. In case one of the switch or one of the cable goes down, RSTP will make sure or ensure that the other ports are still communicating with each other, and it won't create a network loop as well. And LLDP is, again, you can see the topology of your network by able to see the MAC addresses of the devices that are connected to this particular switch, and it will automatically show up when you have LLDP enabled. And you can quickly find out from LLDP what devices are connected to what port. Again, so you can also see once you enable these, you can see what devices are connected, and you can also see MAC addresses of these devices that are connected or were connected to this particular port right here. And then you can quickly find out what's connected to your switch with LLDP. IGMP snooping is also a process of listening to an internet group management protocol network traffic, and it controls the delivery of IP multicasts. Network switches with IGMP snooping listen on IGMP conversations between hosts and the router and maintain a map of which links need which IP multicast transmission. Okay, and then once you enable these IGMP snooping, you have to make sure you enable, or you have to make sure you have to provide what port the router is connected to, so it doesn't create any kind of issues. You can also block multicast flooding from unknown sources by enabling this particular multicast flood blocking. But we suggest to use this function or disable this function unless it's necessary, because it will block all multicast packets, including system control packets as well. So only block in case if you're sure about this particular setting. And if you enable fast leave, as soon as the software receives IGMP leave message, the software will stop forwarding multicast data to that particular port. So you can enable that, and if you receive the leave option, it will automatically leave that particular port out of the IGMP snooping. And under ACLs, you can also create ACLs by IP address. Again, ACL is, it's a 802.3x flow control for balanced connection between two different network speeds. And also you can with ACLs, you can actually create you can block a device to communicate to another device, and also from you can also block them to use ports as well. We also support blocking via MAC address as well. You can also create rules using MAC address and then allow or deny them, or you can also completely block them from the network as well. QoS, again, QoS, we also support QoS. QoS, our switches also supports the quality of service. This is enabled by default, and if a user is not sure how to set up QoS, then leaving default setup is recommended for best results. But if you would like to set up your own QoS settings, you can set up under the QoS inspection or QoS settings inspection. Also, we do support DSCP inspection as well. And once you set up those settings, you can you can enable or disable the inspection and also provide priority as well. Okay. The lowest number means the highest priority on the QoS settings. The other settings is under system settings. Again, this gives you information about the IP address, the switch. You can edit the switch name. Also edit. You can also set up manual IP address settings. You can change the password of your switch, enable time or change time of the switch as well. You can back up and restore settings. You can also restore factory reset your switch as well, and also enable HTTPS as well. And on the firmware update, you can check for firmware updates, or you can manually update the firmware for the switch on the QNAP as well. All right, so these are so this is a switch settings page. I'll hand it back over to Cody.
So with that, we're going to be going into a Q&A time.
Thank you very much, Cody. So we have a question here. It says, if you have a 10 GB switch like our QSWM408S, do I also need to have a 10 GB router to run 10 GB network, or can I use 1 gigabit router without compromising performance with 10 gigabit devices? So actually, you don't need to have a 10 GB router. You actually have a 1 GB router connected to one of the 1 GB ports on the switch, and everything will still work properly without having any issues. Again, we do support flow control. So if you have devices that are not 10 GB and devices that are 10 GB, when they communicate to each other, the flow control will ensure that the connection between those devices are stable and do not have any particular issues as well. So there won't be any packet losses being because it's a higher end device. I have another question regarding a switch that has stopped working. So if you do have a switch that had stopped working, we do recommend trying to reset the switch if you don't have any settings set enabled. Also recommend to create a ticket under helpdesk.qnap.com, and so that we can take a look at what the issue is. If you did enable any kind of settings recently that did change or that made it to stop working, then you want to make sure that you set the switch and then look at the settings again. For example, when doing this particular demo, I did enable link aggregation for a device that doesn't support link aggregation, like my computer. So if I enable that device, or if I enable link aggregation with LSCP, but the computer is not supporting that, then again, I wasn't able to communicate to the switch because it's not LSCP device. So I had to connect to another port and then try to see if I can communicate to that particular. And I was able to get access to the switch, and I can go back in the link aggregation page and delete that particular port. So you can try multiple ports because it did have 4 to 8 ports, right? So you can try another port that you can see if you can communicate to that particular port, and hopefully that will be able to give you access to the switch, and then you can reset it, or you can change the settings that you tried to do recently as well. And another question, again, if you tried all these settings and if it doesn't work, unfortunately, it could be a switch issue. So then I would recommend, again, contacting helpdesk.qnap.com and let our support take a look at it, and we'll be able to provide further steps as well. Because we do have manual firmware upgrade options as well using the console port, so we can try that as well. So we do have multiple options to see if you can bring back the switch. So let's try to submit a ticket, and then let's see if we can take a look at it. Another question is, can I aggregate 1 GB and 10 GB together? I have a dedicated address on 1 GB. You can actually aggregate those ports, but again, it won't be beneficial because, again, it won't, when you have LSCP on multiple different speeds, it may not work properly because because it may not support, or it may just use the 1 GB port, because you cannot, when you enable LSCP, it doesn't actually select which speed is going to select, which port is going to communicate between. So it will actually try to use all particular port, and it may be able to. It may use both ports as well. So again, depends upon your setup, but yes, you can aggregate different 1 GB and 10 GB port as well. Thank you for your feedback regarding the 2 GB, 2.5. Yeah, 2.5 gigabit is actually a very affordable switch option that you can actually upgrade your network with 2.5 gigabit networking. Again, the QNAP does have other options for 2.5 gigabit port as well. Let me share my screen quickly. So yeah, if you do purchase any switch that has 10 GB HT port, what I mean by that is so when you do support, so when you have a switch, let's say for the 2C M2C that has the 10 GB HT port, those will able to communicate down to 1 gigabit port as well. So and again, this our new switches is a QSW M2108. This is actually a 2.5 gigabit port on all 8 ports, and then you have 10 gigabit as a backbone port as well. We have another question. On a 10 GB switch, do you just end up using one of the 10 GB ports to connect to a 1 GB network switch? If you do have a switch if you do have a QNAP switch that supports 10 GB HT port, you can actually connect it to another switch that also supports 1 GB. But if you don't have it, you cannot use the SFP because SFP Plus port do not support lower end speeds. You actually have to have 10 GB speed, 10 GB network on the other end as well. But if you don't, let's say for example, if you don't have a port that has 10 GB HT port, then you can use one of the 1 gig port to connect to another switch. So yes, you can actually connect to another switch to expand your network using one of the 1 gig port on the QNAP. And again, SFP Plus ports are the 10 GB. SFP Plus ports are actually 10 GB ports as only. Yeah, you have to use the 10 GB, the RJ45 connection to connect to 1G port. If you do have a switch, because we do have switches like this one, actually has SFP Plus port 10G, also has 10G based RJ45 10G port as well. If you do have port that has RJ45 connection, you can actually connect that to a 1G port, actually negotiate down to 1 GB connection. But only requirement is 1G, the 10G on SFP Plus port do not negotiate down. It's only 10 GB port only. We have a question about RSTP again. So RSTP, the RSTP is again a connection that allows you to connect multiple switches to give you redundancy. So if you have maybe 2 or more switches and you want to make sure you connect them in a same network, you can actually connect one switch to the other. So going back to this example, unfortunately, I don't have an example on my screen, but this particular icon already provides the best example. Right? You have 3 switches connected in this particular topology. You can actually connect each one cable from one of the switch, and you can actually have multiple cables connected to one of the multiple ports to the same switch. So you have redundant ports. If that port or cable goes down, your connection still stays online. If you have a whole switch that actually goes down, the other 2 switches will still be able to communicate to each other. So you just have to make sure you have cable going from one switch to the other, and then going back to the main, going back to the other switch as well. So that's so switch 1 cable going from switch 1 to switch 2 to switch 3, switch 3 back to switch 1. That's how it can. So when you have this particular setup, in case if one of the ports or switch go down, you have other 2 switches still communicate. If the port goes down, let's say if one of the cable stops working, you disconnect, or the cable cuts in half, or you disconnect the cable, the other switch will still be able to communicate using the other backup path. So we'll take the backup path from here. So with RSTP, you'll be able to communicate. You'll be able to set up this particular topology as well. I have another question regarding, I have a PCD switches that, what is the proper way to connect these switches to unmanaged switches? Can you please provide the model number of the switch you're trying to use? Should be just plug and play, so you cannot connect any of these ports to that particular to the QNAP and still be able to communicate. Now, if you do have a 10 GB switch that is not a QNAP switch and you want to connect to a QNAP switch, you can actually you can actually purchase a full 10 GB port that all the ports are 10 GB ports, or you can connect. If you don't need all 10 GB connection, you can actually use one of these switches where actually you can use the 10 GB port as a backbone connection. What 10 GB backbone allows you to do is, when you have a lot of devices that are that are 1 GBE, but you have, let's say for example, you have a location that has multiple floors, and you have a switch on each floor, right? And then all these devices are 1 GBE connection. But if you connect each switches to if you connect the switches to each other by using 1 gigabit connection, you're going to saturate 1 gigabit connection, because let's say for example, on this switch you have 8 1 gigabit connection. You have or let's say if you have 7 1 gigabit connection using one of the port to connect to the other switch. So we have 7 1 gigabit connection only trying to communicate to the device that is connected to the other switch using that one port, and it's only 1 gigabit connection. It's going to saturate that connection, because you have all these switches communicating to the 1 GBE port. Again, you have 7 gigabit connection communicating through that single 1 gigabit connection. That's going to saturate very quickly. But if you have a switch like ours, and most of our switches do have at least 1 or 2 10 gigabit connection, so you can actually connect switch on floor 1 to the switch on floor 2 using the 10 gigabit connection. So what happens then when you have all these 1 gigabit connections communicating to the other devices that is connected to the other switch, then it will use the 10 gigabit connection, and it will still be able to provide the best bandwidth, because your backbone of your network is high speed connection. The connection between each switches are still 10 gigabit connection. So that's another great way to connect. So if you have all these switches that from QNAP, you will see we always have at least one 10 gigabit port. So those ports are a great option for upgrading your backbone. So if you're connecting multiple switches to each other, always use the 10 gigabit port to connect each switches together. Again, that's a great way to do that as well. So if you have a QSW, so QSW and 1600p. So 1600p, the QGD switch, you can actually connect the switch to any of the port on the 1600p. So I think we don't have So you can actually connect to any of the 16 port of the 10 gigabit connection on the QNAP to one of the ports here, and it will be able to work. Now, I think using a QSW if you have a QSW with SFP plus port, you can actually connect the SFP plus cable as well between the QGD and the QSW switch. But so you can actually connect to any of the 10 gigabit or 1 gigabit port on the QNAP switch. Okay, so you have a 10 gigabit connection and 44 1 gigabit connection. Unfortunately, right now we don't have a large switch, but we're actually working on a switch that will have a high number of ports. But for those type of connection, then you will want to have something like a 12-port 10 gigabit connection switch for your 10 gigabit ports, and then you can actually have maybe get a 2108 or 2108 as well for a 1 gigabit connection. But right now we don't have a higher port. So for a 10 gigabit connection, if it's distributed between SFP and 10G-based connection, they can actually have like one of our M1208 if you need managed connection. If you don't need managed connection, you can actually use our other unmanaged switches as well, like an QSW 1208 8C that gives you access to the 12 10 gigabit port. Now connection, just to give you, so ports that have combo, so QNAP also sells combo ports as well. What combo ports allows you to do is you can either use one of the SFP plus port, or you can use the RJ45 connection, but you can't use together. So you can actually use one of the SFP plus or the 10G. That's how the combo port works. So I need to use many of our QSW. So yeah, so for your connection, for your 20 10 gigabit connection, you can use one of these switches. If you do have 1600p as well already, so then you can actually connect your to that 1600p to that QSW using that 1 gigabit connection. But again, you're going to saturate your 1020 gigabit into 1 gigabit. So you have to think about that as well, because 1600p does not have a 10 gigabit port. Yes. So on the management interface, it will show you which port are 10 gigabit port. So right here, actually, so the ports are not. So it depends upon what kind of port. So on the QSW switches, the last 4 ports will be the 10 gigabit connection. So the last few ports will be the 10 gigabit ports on the QNAP. All right, that will be it for today. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining in.